So I thought it'd be fun to talk about the trip and kind of summarize what trip?
Oh, the last.
Our last trip that we just got back from about 2 weeks ago, just over 2 weeks ago. Yeah, 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And what would you say the highlights of the trip were?
What do I mean? No, I'm just kidding. Well, the big highlight was being able to travel with my sister and her husband for 2 weeks. And the other highlights...
Especially because that was supposed to happen in 2020 and then...
Yeah. It got postponed.
Yeah.
And the other thing was, I think, different than most of our trips or any of our trips, we were more in the countryside, rural areas, both, in southern France, right along the Pyrenees mountains, was just really, really beautiful and really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And also in Italy and the Tuscany region, it was beautiful driving through the countryside. So.
Yeah. And what about doing all that? We had 5 rental cars, is that right?
5 rental cars, which is also unusual. We've never spent so much of a trip with a rental car. Usually it's predominantly not in a rental car, and there might be a little portion of it that is.
Mm-hmm. But did that change? Well, would you do that? Would you drive that much again? I guess.
Yeah, it all depends on where we're going and what we want to see. I mean, if we're going from city to city, and then public transport, because you don't need a rental car if you're in a city.
In fact, it's a hassle.
In fact, it's also often illegal to drive in the cities, other than taxis and that sort of thing. So, But this time we were hardly in any big cities. We were in Rome and Barcelona.
And maybe Bordeaux.
Bordeaux
a big city,
and Toulouse.
Yeah.
But each of those was pretty quick.
Right. Is there anything about this trip you'd do differently if we were planning it again?
Wait a minute. Did we talk about your highlights?
Oh, no, I was just thinking the same thing.
Aren't we jumping ahead?
We're jumping ahead, yes. One of my highlights was definitely the canoeing on the Dordogne. I think we got up that morning and I said, I don't know if I want to do this.
No, you weren't hesitant. You said, I don't want to do this, didn't you?
Probably, yes.
Canoe? It's kind of cold out.
Yeah, and I don't think I'm good at it. And I was thinking, this is, going to be frustrating and hard. And it was super simple. I mean, it was, we wouldn't have had to paddle at all, I don't think. Occasionally, I wouldn't have had to paddle.
The river was high and flowing very good speed, so you wouldn't have had to really paddle.
And you wouldn't have expected it to be as, we saw almost no signs of habitation. I mean, most of it was, except when you would come around a corner and see a chateau or that little town. Mm-hmm. But, so it was gorgeous, it was relaxing, it was easy. And it was just beautiful. I mean, you couldn't have asked for anything.
And there was no one else on the river. We saw one other canoe briefly.
For like 5 minutes. Yeah, it was really stunning. I think the countryside also for me, I mean, how gorgeous Tuscany was. It really, driving through Italy, really made me realize how, like when we were up around Milan, that's the industrial part of Italy, I guess. And I've probably always known that, but you really saw the difference in the number of people and the amount of industrial stuff in northern Italy versus Tuscany, which was just idyllic.
Yes.
It's almost it's hard to compare it to any place else. Maybe a little bit like Napa, but it doesn't feel at all over cutesy or anything. It's just really
it's
real.
Not the topography the industrial part is pretty mountainous, really.
And pretty gorgeous, really.
Yeah, but it's full of little towns and cities. Yeah. And
probably because there was so much water there that the, back before electricity, they had power from water and everything.
Right.
I guess, I don't know. Yeah, so those were probably my highlights too. Like, and in France, when we toured the chateau near Toulouse, Chateau Saint-Barbe, that was just really, really cool. Again, because it was real and we were the only ones there. And
yeah, that's the kind of thing that's
yeah,
you like when you're traveling.
right.
Take a tour. You're the only ones on it.
Exactly. So now, is there anything you would do differently?
I don't know. I don't. As far as places to go and that sort of thing.
I was trying to think if I have anything.
I mean, the only thing I would definitely do different. It's a small thing, but we have a spreadsheet.
Right.
That has where we're going to be, the town, the name of the hotel, whether breakfast is included, yes or no, whether it's prepaid or not paid, and the time that it can be canceled. Is it you can't cancel beyond 1 week ahead or 2 weeks ahead or a month ahead, and then how far it is from one place to the other according to Google Maps, which is ours, but it gives us a rough idea. It's 2 hours to the next place. But what we don't have in there, and it would been very helpful, was check-in times.
Oh, that turned out to be we're looking for downsides of the trip. So often we were ready to check in, take a nap, and then go exploring. We couldn't check in, or
Right.
there was nobody at the place.
A lot of the places you could not check in until 5 p.m. or some of them 4 p.m. or some of them 3:30.
And that meant nobody was even there. It wasn't like they said,
the doors were locked.
Yeah, nobody answered the doorbell.
Right.
It wasn't like they said, "Oh, you can't check in till 4.
Yeah.
Store your luggage."
And all this was probably on the reservation sheets that we had, but it would have been nice to have it right there with all the other information.
Well, and now we know that there's no point in even trying before the check-in time.
Right.
Really.
Right. Unless we are in a city in a hotel,
Right.
it might have a check-in time at 2 p.m., but you get there at noon and the room's ready, you can check in.
Right. That happened too.
That happened too. But for us, when you have to be out at 11, and it's an hour drive to the next place, and you can't check in till 5, you got to fill some time somehow.
And you might as well make a plan for that.
Yeah, right.
Or else plan to take a nap in the car beside the road or something.
That has to be planned?
Well, yes, it's very important.
I thought that could just be spontaneous.
Well, it can be. It's allowed to. Yes. So is there any, well, I guess the only other thing I was thinking, I think I got better at navigation as we went along. Because when you're it's very useful to have a paper map. But Google, it's so much easier than it used to be, because when you're not sure where you are, you can look at your phone map, and see where you are. But if you follow that, you often end up in the wrong place, or you end up on roads you don't want to go on. So it's really better, I think, to mainly look at the road signs and have an idea, okay, I want to go towards this town, and just follow the road signs rather than following like Google Maps.
Google Maps takes you in places you don't want to be. I mean, alleys and stuff.
Yes.
Often.
Yes.
And then you realize, well, we could have it would have been a block or two farther, but we could have just stayed on the main road and come around this way rather than taking this shortcut through a one-way alley.
One of the nightmares of the trip was leaving Toulouse, and I think I had you go down one-way alley where you had to back out, and then we made multiple. I felt really bad. I mean, you
leaving Toulouse?
Leaving Toulouse. Oh. We just picked up the car, and it was, Joanne and Brian had just left, and I was relieved because they would have been, they would have been very nice, but I felt horrible. Anyway, so I tried to get better at navigation, and I think as we went along, I figured that it's better to follow the road signs than to follow Google too closely. So people have asked me how long when we leave on a trip, I barely know where we're going sometimes, I general feel.
You have the countries,
but I have the spread. I have the countries.
Okay.
And I planned some of this. I made the reservation at the chateau for the wine tour and stuff. And then we have the spreadsheet that has where we're going each day with the address. So that's what makes it so easy, I guess. So how long does it take you to plan a trip like this? Because you book everything ahead of time, pretty much.
Well, this is the first trip where everything was booked ahead of time. We've never had it all booked.
Oh, 'cause
Usually on a 9-week trip, maybe the hotels are booked 6 or 7 weeks through, and then as we get closer toward the end, we book those last 2 weeks. But part of that is because previously a lot of the rooms were non-refundable. So the more you book ahead, the more liability you have that if the trip got canceled or something, you'd be out a bunch of money.
Right.
But this time, due to COVID probably, there was, when you booked, there just wasn't that option of a non-refundable lower price.
Right.
Everything was refundable.
So that's part of why you booked it all ahead of time.
I mean, at least up to a few days ahead or a week ahead of when you were there. So there was no real advantage not to book.
So how long does it? I mean, this trip was partly planned already because you just picked up the stuff that you planned for the end of the
how many weeks?
2020 trip.
Yeah, so that was just 2 weeks. The first 2 weeks were planned from a year and a half earlier.
Right.
And we just did, rebooked the same places pretty much.
So how long does it take you to plan a 9-week trip, would you guess? I know it's not a science.
Yeah, a couple of months. I mean, I'd like to get the transportation, the airfare to and from Europe, for example, plus any, flights within Europe or ferries or
trains and stuff.
Trains not as important, but because, I don't want to have hotel rooms and, we can't travel to that place on this day or whatever. I mean, I want to have those things firmly established before I start booking rooms.
And how do you think? What were you thinking about the whole COVID thing before we left, and how did COVID impact the trip? Do you think? And did you feel safe? And
yeah, I felt safe, but I don't know. I mean, when we left, things were looking better everywhere. I mean, the vaccines were out, and
yeah, and they already had higher vaccination rates in all the countries we were going to.
Yeah, they all had significantly higher
than the U.S.
And it varied by country. We were in 3 countries basically, and Spain was probably the. I mean, as far as mask wearing, social distancing, limited capacity in restaurants, in 100% compliant with the rules. That was Spain.
Yeah.
And they weren't as much checking our vaccination card or are you vaccinated or not. And the few people, a couple people that we talked to about vaccinations and kind of asking, is there vaccine hesitancy? And they were like, no, huh?
What's that?
We had problems getting the vaccine.
Right.
Everybody wanted the vaccine, we couldn't get it, or there's very limited supply. So when we finally had a supply of it, everybody wanted it.
Right.
And then in France, it was very different. It was all about vaccine. If you had to prove you were vaccinated, or you couldn't do anything.
Right.
But if you did show that you were vaccinated, well, then you didn't need to wear a mask. You didn't need the social distance. There was no limited capacity in any place. It was like, that was it. If you're vaccinated, that's it.
Okay. We were saying that when you get at a restaurant and they say, in France they'd say, can we see your passe sanitaire? And in Italy they would say, green pass.
Yeah.
I think they used the word green, not the Italian word for green.
I can't remember.
Anyway, and then they point and the same one worked in Italy and France.
Yeah, the French one worked in Italy.
It was an EU COVID
yeah, they're all connected,
Yeah, they're part of the. Yes.
If you're in the French database, you're still good.
Yes.
In Italy.
Yeah. And so same one worked both places, and then they point their little app at it, and it would give you the big green check, and I'd feel superior. So I think Allison told me that's called gamifying. I think that's and it really worked. It was very cool. Let's see, what else did I want to talk about? Oh, our next trip. So why don't you tell everyone where we're going next and how much planning you've done, or how you're starting to plan for it, and when we're going to go.
There were a lot of questions there.
One at a time.
We're going to Europe. We're leaving mid-February.
Europe and a little bit of North Africa.
Oh yeah, Morocco, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mid-February.
Kind of divided the trip into 3 parts. First part is Portugal and Galicia, which is the part of Spain north of Portugal. Second part, southern Spain. And the third part is to be decided yet.
Okay.
Well, I'm looking at airfares, and
You haven't booked airfares.
I haven't booked anything. I'm just starting
I
to
know.
look at airfares. Airfare has gone up some since our last trip, but it's not terrible. It's the one thing I've noticed. And this is kind of a throwback. I mean, it used to be that you had to book round trip.
Right.
I mean, a round trip was about the same price as one way. So if you
Right.
bought 2 one-ways to Europe and then back from Europe, it cost you twice as much as buying a round trip. And then it got so there was no advantage to a round trip. It was just the price of 2 one-way trips. And I've noticed now that round trip is much cheaper than the 2 singular trips.
Oh, interesting. So where would
Even if they're not from the, coming, if it's San Francisco to Lisbon and then Paris to San Francisco come back, that's still a lot cheaper than doing the 2 flights separate. So, I don't know.
And where
why.
do you think we'll fly into? Sounds like out of the same place?
No, I don't know. We'll fly into Lisbon.
Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty certain.
Okay.
Not sure where we're flying out of, but it could be Paris or it could be,
Okay.
I don't know. Because we haven't done that last third of the trip.
Right.
So,
Okay.
and
Have you started the spreadsheet yet? No.
yeah, I've started the spreadsheet because I have to have the dates.
And what were you telling? You were telling me this morning that some of the how many paradors so the paradors that we like to visit Spain, how many have we visited? So how many are there and how many have we visited?
There are a total of approximately 99. I mean, they're always, once in a while they shutter one and close it up, and then they, once in a while, they open a new one. So it's not a fixed number. It's been 100, it's been 99. I think it's 99 right now. And some of them are closed during the winter.
And how many have we been to?
And we've been to 67, I believe. And there's probably 10 that I have no desire to go to.
Because they're like golf resorts?
Yeah, they're like golf resorts, and nothing special about them.
Although we've been to several where you would have said, well, it looks like a beautiful monastery, but there doesn't seem like there'd be anything there. And then we ask at the desk, and they have some wonderful things. But
and then I can think of one where it's probably, I mean, we could go there, but it's outside of town. And there's so many good hotels in town,
Yes.
Boy, it's a tough decision.
Yeah.
When there's other options that are really nice too.
Okay. So is there? I think that covers everything on my list here. Are there things that that you would do? Oh, and what did you learn from the whole thing? What did you learn on the trip?
Well, I learned several things.
Oh, well, good. I'm glad I asked. I'm glad you added that to the list.
You don't think these trips are somewhat educational?
Oh, absolutely.
Don't you think
Yes,
you learn
no.
things?
Oh, there's no question you learn things. Absolutely.
I mean,
we learned some Italian this trip, for one thing.
Right. Yes. I mean, there was lots of things I learned. I mean, you always learn something about the countries and the people and a little bit of the history of where you're at and all this. But one thing that kind of surprised me was in our first 2 weeks, which was, we started in Barcelona, ended up in Barcelona, but we were in France, Andorra, France, in Spain,
Right.
all along that French-Spanish border, close to it, and how we were almost never out of a region where French or Spanish was their first language. Or, well, no, I can't say that. We were, a large part of the time we were in regions, both in a little bit in France and in Spain, where they spoke Catalan as their first language. Both in France and Spain, we were in a large area that spoke Basque. And then there was, where it wasn't necessarily their first language, one of those, it was their second, or at least the signs had a second language. Even
Right.
like in, going all the way, and I knew that was true here and here, but the area, how big that area was,
Right.
and the crossover. I mean, in Spain, you basically went from the Basque speaking to the Catalan, and I thought there was an area there in between where it was more Spanish. And then in France, even though you really weren't in that region where Catalan is the first language, they still had it on the signs.
Mm-hmm.
All the signs had two languages, French and Catalan, for quite a ways, probably almost all the way to Toulouse.
I think this was the first trip where we ever had anybody try and teach us any Catalan or Basque. Somebody.
Yeah, we learned some Basque, didn't we?
There was the guy who owned one of the hotels we stayed in, or guest houses we stayed in.
In France.
In France. Very friendly guy.
Basque.
Taught us how to say good morning, which I can't say right now.
I can't remember either, but we used it.
We used it, and it totally like, oh, you speak Basque? It almost makes me want to learn some Catalan and Basque before our next trip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was that was one thing we learned. Let's see, was there anything? Well, I don't know. In Italy, I'd say the thing. Well, the languages too. I mean, are quite different. Well, in Spain, we generally speak Spanish.
Right.
So we don't know how the reaction is to English speaking. I mean,
People who don't speak.
We hear it speaking English in hotels all the time, but we don't have a real firm grip on
Yes.
that. But in France, almost universally, you don't speak French? I don't really speak English.
Right. And then
And then you would speak a little French, and they were much relieved.
yes.
And then it turned out that they did speak pretty good English.
When I asked the
It's
young
just
woman,
that they were hesitant.
yeah.
When
I asked the young woman at the winery who was giving us our tour, she started out in French, and I said, would you mind, can you do it in English? And she said, well, I don't speak very good English, but I'll try.
Yeah, and then she spoke great English,
Yes,
Yeah.
perfect English.
And that was pretty common in France.
Yes.
And in Italy, it was, I don't speak very good Italy, but then they wouldn't
It's English,
hesitate.
you mean.
English,
Yeah.
but then they would never hesitate to go right into their English,
Right.
and it was just like a warning. It's not perfect.
Yes, don't
So
judge me.
Don't judge me. And then they would speak
Yes.
English, and it was,
Yes, very, very true.
And then the other thing I think in Italy that I learned, which was, we talked about this when we were there, the World War II stuff. It seems like all the World War II movies and
Everything you learn
everything was
about
about
World War II.
either the Northern Europe, the
Yes.
battles, or the Pacific.
Yes.
And most of the people that of our parents' generation that we knew were in the war
Or either,
were either
in France or in Germany
or
or
the
the Pacific.
Pacific.
Yeah.
So, but we also know, Italy was,
A big part of it.
they were on the other side,
Yes.
is what general pleasure. But then, from the time the Allies invaded Italy, which was Sicily, it was like 30 days before Italy fell. Mussolini was out. Before they got to the mainland.
Yes. Before the Allies got
And
invaded.
then Italy became our ally.
Right, and then the Germans were fighting. They were
And
fighting.
so that the Allies, the Americans were going up the one side of Italy, and the British and all the Commonwealth countries were going up the other coast. With the aid of most of the Italians were fighting then on our side. There were some, but the Germans were in the country. I mean, there were some Italians who were with the Germans too, but basically we weren't fighting the Italians, we were fighting the Germans. And we were trying to keep them occupied so they couldn't
Yes.
release those troops to go fight.
Yeah, I
other
learned a lot
places.
more about the war in Italy than I knew nothing about it before, not like I know a lot now, but I know a lot more than I did.
Right, and we stopped at a British cemetery, World War II, and it only had, what, 300, 400 graves?
Yeah.
Very well kept,
Beautiful.
maintained by the British War Memorial.
War Graves Commission or
Yeah.
something, yeah.
And it was also interesting, there was a guest book, and to read the comments, which all were on Italian except for a couple. But, you can read Italian and understand what's being said. And it was either, there were two sentiments. One, war is horrible. May these people rest in peace, and may we never ever have a war like this again. And the other sentiment was, rest in peace. Thank you for sacrificing for us so that we have our liberty.
Wow.
So I found that interesting. Then when we went to the U.S. Cemetery, which had thousands of Americans buried there, like 4,000, 5,000.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
And then on the wall, 1,600 names
Of unknowns.
of unknowns, soldiers who died in Italy, but they don't know where they're buried or remains are.
Or couldn't identify them. Right.
I mean, the ratio of known to unknown is pretty.
It's amazing or shocking.
Yeah, it you can. There's a lot of things to think about when you see, 4,000 graves and 1,400 unmarked, and all those people, they didn't all support or were enthusiastic about what they were doing, but there was no question about, they did it.
Yeah, exactly.
As opposed to now,
It's hard to even imagine a draft working.
No, if you can't get people to wear a mask because it's too inconvenient, how could you possibly get somebody to go die in a war?
Yeah. Yeah, different time.
Yep, different time. Anyway, anything to add to what you learned?
Well, I learned that my French works kind of okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying to decide whether to study more French or more Italian. Not Italian.
I thought
Spanish.
it was very interesting that when you spoke French, they would direct all their conversation to you.
Now you know how I feel.
And they would turn and look at me like, oh, the deadbeat who hasn't learned any French,
I also learned that people will believe you speak a language. Like I asked our driver when we did the canoe tour, I knew when he was driving us back to pick up our car, I said, in French I said, combien de poissons en cette rive? I mean, something like that. I'm trying to say, how many fish are there in that river? Or are there a lot of fish in that river or something? And he started telling me all about the fish and everything else. I'm going, oh, oui, oui. At every seemed like appropriate point. And I got every third or fourth word, but I really wasn't getting it all. But he just figured I spoke really good French after that because he thought I understood everything he said. I think I do the same thing to people here who know some English and everything. So that was interesting. I realized that I'd like to go back to Pompeii. Naturally enough, doesn't have all the art they found there at the site. They wouldn't want it to be, there's the ruins there, but not all the art and everything. And I'd like to go to the museum in Naples that has a lot of it. We were just listening to a Rick Steves where he said that museum alone is enough reason to go to Naples. So I guess that's the main thing. I mean, not the main thing. You learn a lot traveling. It's a good thing. So, anything else I forgot? Excuse me, anything else I forgot?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, in general, everything turned out pretty much as planned. There were a few places we stayed that were not as good as the pictures.
Well, you just never know.
And you just never know. And the other thing that was really reinforced this time, because maybe just because, but you just take the ADA requirements in the United States for granted. And even though we're not disabled,
Right.
we're getting elderly.
There's almost no place you would go in the U.S. where you wouldn't be able to get to your room. We've had it happen once, but usually you can get to your room without going upstairs.
Right.
And I bet 30% of the places we visited, we had to carry our suitcases upstairs.
A lot of places.
Maybe
and you
more
have
like 50%.
You have no idea when you're booking it. It looks, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And often narrow hallway, going up narrow stairways and steep, and you just never know until you get there. Right? And even the streets.
Yes.
Cobblestone streets are not
ADA compliant.
ADA compliant, and there's no cut curbs or.
No.
I mean, you can't. I mean, not you. Forget being in a wheelchair.
Mm-hmm.
But even if you're with a cane and a little unstable, you could not move around anywhere.
No. We saw almost no wheelchairs.
No.
Almost nobody who was disabled.
No, they can't go out.
Yeah. It's very true. But on the whole, it was an excellent trip. I always come back saying, oh, that's wonderful, let's go again, even though I sometimes have my doubts before we leave that I want to go do this again. But I think it was a great trip. And that's why we're planning another one, right?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.
This was fun.